If you're a fan of the 4:30 movie, you'll love Best Movies Never Made, hosted by myself, Josh Miller.
And Steven Scarlatta.
Where we explore some of the greatest movies never made, like E.T. 2,
Johnny Quest,
Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian,
and Halloween 3D.
New episodes available every other Monday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, this is not really Gene Roddenberry, but if it were, I would urge you to listen and watch the Inglorious Trexperts, because who knows, maybe it'll bring in more income.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and if you're a fan of the only gentleman secret agent with a license to kill and thrill, you should pick up my new James Bond oral history, Nobody Does It Better, available now in hardcover, audio, and digital, wherever books are sold.
Do you expect me to read?
No, I expect you to buy it. Hello, this is Mark A. Altman, and welcome to Father's Day week. Yes, we're back for a very special episode for Father's Day, and I have your favorite, I am your father's. That was a stretch here for the 4:30 movie, but I'm a little rusty. We haven't done this in a while. So I want to bring to you Stephen Monday Melching. Hello, Steve.
Hey there, Daddy-O's.
Oh, man. Tuesday, it's Darren Doctorman.
I got nothing, but happy Tuesday.
Wednesday, it's wacky Ashley Miller.
Who's your daddy?
And Thursday, it's me, Mark K. Altman. And Friday, it's all of us. And in case you haven't listened to the show in a while, remember, this is the show where we curate a fantasy theme week of classic films. And apparently, I was reading on Facebook today that a film critic said something about we don't need to pay attention to movies before 1990, or what was it, Steve? 2000. Oh, excuse me. I stand corrected. Well, apparently, there's no movies worth seeing before the year 2000.
It would seem to me that we don't need to pay attention to critics who say that.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
I believe the criticism was that it's elitist to expect a modern critic to be aware of films before 2000.
Yeah, well.
And should be minimally educated. Right, got it.
My response to that would push us into the explicit category on Apple, so I'm not going to respond to that, but that offends me to the very core of my being. Yeah.
On the other hand, it's someone is stupid on the internet. Film at 11.
Yeah,
I know, but I don't know who said this, but apparently it's actually a working film critic said this, or is it just some?
Look,
it's a working
film critics. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's true. They're all dead. Gone. All the great critics are dead.
I believe it was a working film critic, but on a blog or a website or something, and apparently felt it's not incumbent upon them to educate themselves for the films older than 20 years.
Well, good for them.
That's amazing. I mean, because I remember not so long ago us doing a show about great movies of the millennium, movies made since the year 2000, and that was a struggle.
That was a struggle to come up with like 10.
That was not an easy show to do.
How many of those are there?
Well,
not a lot.
Kids these days are kind of stupid, but hey, that's okay. That's not our fault.
I understand, if you're a younger person, older films feel, they feel old-fashioned, they feel stale, they don't feel vibrant, they don't feel meaningful to them, but, there's a great world of things to discover, looking at older films.
But look, the problem is that no one felt like that before when we were growing up, okay?
That's right.
We were exposed to and saw a whole ton of movies and other things that came way before we were born, okay? So that's not our problem, okay? Our problem is that people don't stretch themselves to have a background of knowledge about this stuff. And hopefully This show is something that can help people establish that background just a tiny little bit.
Yeah, and I certainly don't know. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, we live in an era where it's easier than ever to watch. All of film history is available to you on short notice, and you can take advantage of that. You know, when we were young people growing up, we kind of had to take what was given to us.
That's correct.
And we liked it. No, but there's no excuse to you can curate your own film experience to such a degree that you can watch only films from the last 10 or 20 years, and that's I guess good enough. I don't know.
But look, this is just how the concept of the critic has been debased, right?
Yeah.
We now, when we talk about film critics or whatever, we're talking about people whose job it is just to review films, right? They're film reviewers. They're not truly critics. A good critic has some interest in the history of the form and has some knowledge of it and brings that knowledge to bear when doing some sort of analysis or critique of the film in question. I don't know how you can call yourself a film lover and say, yeah, the world begins in the year 2000. It doesn't mean that you have to spend all day talking about the movies of, say, 1989 or 1981 or whatever it is that you want to do. But it does mean that it is somewhat incumbent upon you, if you present yourself as an expert, to know what the F you're talking about. My 10-year-old kid shouldn't have a better grasp of the history of film than someone who is actually paid to review films.
Right.
There's a sense of, there's this egalitarian sense now because of social media that everyone's opinion is worthwhile.
Right.
And I'm here to tell you it's not.
Right.
I'm not interested in people. I love it, when you read these things like on Deadline or any of these things. It's like, what do you think? Let us know.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit what you think if you're not knowledgeable. I don't care. I don't care what you're seeing this weekend. I don't care what movies you think are good.
And
you know
we
why?
just moved
You're
into the explicit category again.
You're not qualified. You don't know. You're not knowledgeable. I don't care.
And if this
And
all
it makes
sounds
me
like
nuts.
a big parental lecture, welcome to Father's Day.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So welcome.
In my day, we had to walk to
It's
the
all part
movie
of the plan.
theater 3 miles in the snow, uphill, both ways.
We paid for it in pennies that we counted out of our pockets.
I just think everyone thinks they're a freaking expert on the movies.
Right.
And they're not. You know what? You can love movies. It doesn't mean you're an expert. You can love going to the movies. You can love seeing movies. Look, and anyone can become an expert.
Right.
This isn't about going to an expensive film school, as you guys can attest. It's about watching, and you said it yourself. It's never been easier to watch the classic films, the great films. They're all available, except for Gone with the Wind, which apparently is now no longer in vogue.
It'll be back.
No, it's going to be back. And look, I obviously, I don't think HBO Max handled that brilliantly, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with providing context for these movies, as long as they're, continue to be available. I'm going to around to Triumph of the Will, talking about, why it's.
That's a hell of a time to
let's
lose Mark.
Let's not stop recording, because then we'll lose our sync.
Yes, we will. So
we're just going to keep on. There you go. Okay.
I got so worked up, my Zoom died on
goodness.
me.
Okay.
I guess they don't care what I have to say. So anyway, Father's Day. I can't believe I got so angry on Father's Day, because my father never got mad at me. I got along so well with my dad. I can't even think of any times where we had fights. My mother, on the other hand. So anyway,
yeah, but she took you to the Hunger, dude. So
she took me to the Hunger. She did. She had to be the disciplinarian.
And she got you into Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
By the way, what did your mothers think of our Mother's Day episode?
My mom thought it was a lot of fun, and she was very happy to hear it. So she says thank you, by the way.
Oh, great. Well, it was her idea, and we thank her. What about you, Ashley? Did you convey to your mother what we did?
I did. I'm not sure she 100% understands what it was that we did, but I think that she was very excited to participate.
Right.
How about you, Steve?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I mentioned to my mom that we had done the episode. She says, "Oh yeah, I listened to it." I'm like, oh, you did? Really? No, she enjoyed it.
My mother was insulted that I didn't ask her. She said, all the other guys, they asked their mothers. I said, you just guessed. I said, well, I thought you would be impressed how well I know you. She says, well, you didn't mention Friendly Persuasion. I said, yeah, that's true. I should have mentioned that. You didn't mention Pan's Labyrinth. And I'm like,
What?
wait a second. Pan's Labyrinth? That's one of your favorite movies of all time? She goes, yes. And I'm like, you're right. I wouldn't have had no idea. So I said, and she gave me this litany of movies, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should have asked you. But I think she liked it. She enjoyed it. So I'm glad. And I'm glad that we're here to do Father's Day, because as much as our mothers were a huge influence on our movie going, I'm curious, were your fathers cinephiles? Were they people that helped get you passionate about movies?
Oh, you'll find out when we get to Tuesday.
Oh, okay. What about you, Steve? What about you? Your dad, is he a big movie guy?
Interestingly, we didn't see a lot of movies. We didn't go out to the movies a lot when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. But my dad was probably the bigger movie lover, because I have memories of going to the movies with him. He took me to see The Land of Time Forgot. He took me to see Batman 66. He took me to see, Laurel and Hardy movies. And we went as a family to see Star Wars, the first Star Wars. And he took me to see Alien, of all things.
Wow.
And he even once, when I needed a ride, drove me to see Return of the Jedi. He didn't sit with me, but I still remember vividly about halfway through the movie when they're in the Ewok village, I hear this snoring coming from the theater. And I turned around, and there he was, sawing some logs a few rows back in the middle of Return of the Jedi. It's hilarious.
Wow.
My father was, I think, more of a film lover when I was growing up. But oddly enough, my mom is a huge moviegoer now. I think my dad watches a lot of movies now, but it's all stuff on streaming and stuff. Whereas my mother will go out to the theater and see all the new releases.
He wasn't celebrating the love, your dad.
No.
Right. I thought you were going to say you turned around and it was Richard Marquand snoring.
No, they weren't on set. They were watching it.
Oh, right.
I don't know if Richard Marquand ever saw that movie, but it was me watching Eye of the Needle. I think I fell asleep watching Eye of the Needle. So anyway, Ashley, what about you?
Oh, yeah, man. My dad loves the movies. It's funny because, I was a very sensitive kid, so I didn't get to go see Alien in the theater when I was 6 years old. But my dad was constantly taking my brother to the movies. He would take me when it was appropriate. I remember going to see Black Hole and Tron and Star Wars and Superman 2 and Star Trek and all of the, you name it. Like, if it was cool and it, made sense for me to go see it, Dad took me. He's the one who introduced me to the oeuvre of Clint Eastwood, and not just his Man with No Name films, but all of his World War II films. I have very fond memories of watching Kelly's Heroes with my dad several times. So yeah, a lot of my love of movies comes from him.
Nice.
No, that's great. Boy, I'll tell you, my father was great about my love of this stuff, because, I remember one time I threw a fit that I wanted to, it was like a Sunday afternoon. I desperately wanted to go to Forbidden Planet in Manhattan. And I just was like adamant. And here we are, like 40 minutes away in Brooklyn. And he was just like, okay, fine. And we drove into the city and we went to Forbidden Planet. So he was always really good about indulging my vices, so to speak. But it's funny because both my parents were kind of strict about, like, I never saw Alien in a theater because they wouldn't let me see an R-rated movie in 79. And even Jaws, I didn't see till many years later. They wouldn't let me see. I remember like something like Animal House, I didn't get to see until I was babysitting, and the people I was babysitting for had it. And so when the kids went to sleep, I watched Animal House for the first time. Like, this movie is great. I think it was the same thing with 10. But so they were both pretty much on the same. That may be the only thing they were on the same page about, but they were on the same page about not letting us watch, these movies. But it just made me want to see those movies that much more.
By the way, 10 is another movie that should go on the list of movies not to watch with your mom week.
Right.
Yeah, that's for sure. But that I did not see with my mom, just the hunger.
Good.
But which she never gets tired of hearing that story, and nor the Star Trek the motion picture story, which she still is like, I didn't hate it that much. It's like, yes, you did. Yes, you did. So anyway, so the idea is, obviously in the case of Ashley and Steve, they were actually able to speak with their dad. I presume you talked to your fathers about what movie they want to pick. So we'll be going with their selections. In the case of Darren and myself, we'll have to sort of, based on our own
We're going to vamp
knowledge.
a little bit about what might be.
Yeah, well, what they would have picked if we were fortunate enough to still have them with us. Although I think we're very close with our dads. I have a feeling that we'll be very much in the ballpark. Yeah. So let's start on Monday with Steve Melching and his dad's pick for Father's Day week.
Yeah, so when I asked my dad to send me a list of some of his favorite movies, I didn't expect to get such an expansive list. He sent me almost 20 titles. And oddly enough, the movie I was sure was going to be at the top of his list wasn't on the list at all, which was unusual. I could tell you what that movie is now, or I could hold off.
Oh no, tell us! I must know.
I thought for sure my dad's favorite movie was going to be Dances with Wolves because he is obsessed with that movie. I think I bought it for him on Laserdisc, and I think I bought it for him on DVD. And I gave him the soundtrack CD for it, and because he's a huge fan of westerns, and that whole culture and history and all that. So he was absolutely taken with that film when it came out, and is obsessed with it ever since. But it didn't make his list.
Right.
I think that's going to be a recurring theme, westerns.
Yeah.
Throughout this show.
So
it's something about dads and westerns.
Yeah. So what I think, and I fear I may once again have stolen Mark's pick, but the pick that my dad had at the top of his list was probably the fatheriest Father's Day father film you could pick, and it's a classic in the genre that I love and just happened to watch myself a few weeks ago randomly, and it is a film that's probably a favorite of a lot of men of this generation. Men who grew up in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I think it really struck a chord, and of course I'm talking about John Sturgis's The Magnificent Seven.
Sure.
You magnificent bastard! You stole my pick.
But
that's okay. Yeah, of course it was. I mean, yeah, it was. I mean, it was so funny. On Christmas, I got my first VHS of the Magnificent Seven from my dad. It was something that we always watched when it was on Channel 5 in New York. Very special film for us. But so I'm not too. Go ahead, tell us about why the Seven is your dad's pick.
Brennan, McQueen, Coburn, Vaughn, Brunson, Buchholz, Dexter, the Magnificent Seven.
We wish you to help us. There's this man, Calvera.
A thief.
A murderer. He and his men, they steal our food. And then they leave us to starve. And he will do so until he is stopped.
Even 5 won't give us too much trouble.
There won't be any trouble if you ride on.
Ride on? I'm going into the hills for the winter. Where am I going to get the food for my men?
Buy it or grow it.
Or maybe even work for it.
Somehow I don't think you solved my problem.
We deal in lead, friend. Solving your problems isn't our line.
Guns, ammunition. You know how much money that costs? Huh?
He had a town at his mercy, and the Magnificent Seven at his throat. 7 who fought like 700. The Magnificent Seven.
he's a huge fan of Westerns. You know, he loves the spaghetti Westerns. He loves all kinds of Westerns. He sent me a list of other Westerns that he loves too, like Monty Walsh and Open Range. We talked about Open Range on the show recently.
For Christmas.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was a Christmas pick I think I gave you for the hit Secret Santa. So
you did.
He loves it because it's so. He loves the sort of realistic feel of it, the location photography in Mexico, and how can you not love that cast? You know, it's a cast of icons with Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson, Robert Vaughn, James Coburn, and then the great Horst Buchholz and Brad Dexter, and then Eli Wallach as the leader of the bandit gang. And of course, everyone knows this movie. It's famously the Western adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. Oddly enough, interestingly, I just learned this. I didn't realize this, that John Sturges really wanted Steve McQueen for that role, but Dick Powell, the actor-singer, who was also a producer and was producing Wanted Dead or Alive with Steve McQueen, and wouldn't let McQueen out of his contract for the TV show. So McQueen faked a car accident and claimed he had whiplash, needed to recover, and then snuck out of the country to film the film, make the movie in Mexico.
That's great.
And famously, there was a lot of clashing of egos on the set between Brenner and McQueen, trying to upstage each other. I think McQueen was upset that he didn't get very much dialogue in the film, so he was always doing little bits of business to upstage Yul Brynner.
The famous thing is in the when they're going up to take the hearse up to Boot Hill, and he's taking off his hat, he's playing with his hat, he's fiddling with his gun, and Yul Brynner is just there, stiff as a board, dominating the screen, and McQueen is doing anything he can do to get some action for himself.
And it's funny because these actors, a lot of them weren't, this film is 1960, so they weren't all huge stars yet at this point. And crazy enough, for as entertaining as this movie was, and of course it has that iconic score by Elmer Bernstein that is so hummable and is just one of the all-time great Western themes. The movie was not a success in this country. It was a disappointment at the box office, and it didn't get good reviews either. But it was a huge hit in Europe and the Soviet Union, because with Yul Brynner being a Russian, so it did great overseas. And it's one of those films that has since cemented its place as one of the the most iconic, most beloved Westerns of all time. Even though it's one of those that took a while to get there. But
were you with me at Telluride when we saw Far Away So Close?
No.
The sequel to Wings of Desire? Because Horst Buchholz was in that. And I remember being so excited. I said, I have not seen Horst Buchholz in anything since, the Magnificent Seven. I mean, he was kind of a joke, right? Because they all became superstars. Like, McQueen and Charles Bronson and James Coburn and Robert Vaughn, and then there's Horst Buchholz, who couldn't get arrested.
No one gave 2 F's for Horst.
And of course Eli Wallach, that great Mexican actor.
Sure.
He's so good in the movie. Yeah. Like you never cast a Jew from Brooklyn as a Mexican bandito today, but man, is he good. Yeah. As he's so good as Calvera.
That's it. And I always think of that Cheers episode when they're all the men in the bar humming the theme to the Magnificent Seven. It's this whole thing where they, Sam and Cliff and Norm would get together to watch the Magnificent Seven. It's just one of those movies that brings together men of a certain generation. And, I think we're part of members of that second generation that came to it through our fathers.
Right.
Because it was one of their favorite films and they wanted to share it with us. And, I always appreciate that. And it's a film that I've come to love dearly as well.
And it's funny, as good as the Magnificent Seven is, the sequels are all terrible. I don't know if you've seen Return of the Seven and Guns of Magnificent Seven, the Magnificent Seven Ride, and after Yul Brynner comes back in Return of the Seven, you have George Kennedy and Lee Van Cleef, and none of them hold a candle. I love them in other roles, but none of them hold a candle to Yul Brynner, Brenner in Magnificent Seven.
But of course, the prequels, Magnificent 1 through Magnificent 6, are all just awful, unwatchable.
You know what I watched for the first time? I can't believe I never seen it. Battle Beyond the Stars.
Oh yeah.
How have you never seen that? Sorry,
I don't know.
Speaking
I literally
of
realized.
Seven.
Well, that's what I'm making the point, because of course it's John Sayles wrote it, and it's a huge ripoff, and it makes no bones about it, of Magnificent Seven. It's Magnificent Seven in space, and I don't know. That movie had my name written all over it. It's like, I don't know. And I seen the trailer. I knew the movie backwards and forwards, but I'd never seen it.
Wow.
I think because it never played theatrically in Brooklyn,
right?
And then for whatever reason, I just never saw it. And I was always obsessed with the movie. And I finally watched it recently. Shout Factory did a really nice Blu-ray, and it's awful. It's really awful.
Yeah. But But it has its heart in the right place.
Yeah, yes. I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I would agree.
But
it's awful.
That was my very first pick for this show, I think, for Sci-Fi Week. Yeah.
No, in the Shadow of Star Wars Week.
Yeah, the Shadow of Star Wars Week. Yep.
That's right. That was a fun week back in the day. So, Steve, why do you think your dad loved that movie so much? Why do you think he picked that movie?
It's the characters are so lively. It's got such a great sense of humor to it. It's got a great, human story with these oppressed villagers and these gunslingers that come together, maybe initially out of a sense of greed or desperation, and end up feeling a duty to this town and to save it. And I think it speaks to him on all those levels. He loves music, so I know he loves the score, and he loves gunfighting and gunplay, and he's one of those dads that can watch a Western and say, like, well, I like the movie, but the Navy Colt model wasn't in service until 1886, and this was 1875. So points deducted for that. He can identify every firearm or every bit of historical inaccuracy in a movie like this.
But Steve, any firearm that was developed before the year 2000 just doesn't matter.
It's all the same.
It's funny. It also has that original Han Solo moment, because there's that great scene, where they all get thrown out of town, and despite the fact, that it's desperate and it's impossible to win, they decide to go back because it's the right thing to do. These mercenaries, these assassins, they're basically more ethical than anyone, right. And they decide to go back. And then Brad Dexter decides he's not going to go back with them. And at the last second, he comes in like Han Solo on his horse, and I'll get you out of there, Chris. And it's so great. So great. I love that movie.
I
love it.
That quiet scene with Robert Vaughn with the flies on the table. And he scoops them up in his hand and opens up his hand. He's like, there was a time when I would have caught all three. I'm like, oh my God, I love that.
Oh man.
It's right before he started using the Helsinki formula. That's a deep cut. He used to do TV commercials for this Helsinki formula, which is like a hair restoration thing.
That is a deep cut. It's
funny,
I feel like
because
that's
a spy movie with Laurence Olivier.
Len Dayton's The Helsinki Formula.
Yeah, exactly. Next on the 430 movies that don't exist but should.
I think we got to do that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, let's totally do that. Because we weren't sure. Remember, for like 6 months, we weren't sure if we should do Spoiler Week, and we were going back and forth and vacillating. And then we did it, and everyone loved it. Everyone just loves Spoiler Week. So it's like, when we come up with these ridiculous ideas, we should actually just go with your heart. Look in your heart.
Maybe when we go back into the studio, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. We're back in the studio when this mad hiatus is over, both of the show and of life.
Yes.
Okay. So that's Monday, The Magnificent Seven, Steve Melching and his dad. Fantastic pick.
On strong on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. Machismo, testosterone. You know, it's just great. So, okay. So Tuesday, Darren Dochterman.
Tuesday. This is going to be a little rambling, and it's going to have bits of stories that you've probably heard before, but they're necessary. My dad grew up in a small town in Illinois, a very small town. It was a railroad town. My grandfather worked for the railroad, but my grandfather had a job as usher at the local one-screen movie house on the main street in downtown. And so my dad, when he was growing up in the 30s and the 40s, got to see movies for free all the time. And he became a huge movie fan, and he loved movies, and he transferred that love to me as I was growing up. One of the annoying things that came out of this was that he had absolutely no composure about walking into a movie as it was still going, you know, and sitting through the last half and then watching through again from the beginning through the next show. We did this often when I was growing up. It was the most annoying thing that I experienced growing up. I remember specifically walking into Superman 2, seeing the Kryptonian villains flying into the window of the Daily Planet and starting to talk with Lex Luthor. And I'm going, what's going on? Everything. We're missing the whole setup. Didn't matter. We sat through the end and watched it through again until, you know, the moment where, oh, that's where this came in. And then we sat through the end. So he had absolutely no composure about ruining the telling of the story. It was just a commodity to him. So,
but I think in a lot of ways, wasn't that, you know, in the earlier days of film, they would just run the films over and over, and you just pay your admission and go in, and that was common, I think.
Yeah. Well, because it came from the old Nickelodeons, where it was automatic on a loop, and they kept running and running and running.
Well, and they were running the newsreel, and they were running this thing, and basically you went for the air conditioning.
Right.
You know, you go to the theater, and then you sit there all day.
It was just a thing to do. So, anyway, but with this constant, you know, watching movies and the serials, the Saturday morning serials, and all that, he developed a love for movies, and whenever these movies would show up on TV, he would turn them on and he would say, hey, you might like this. And so we would watch them sometimes on the 4:30 movie, sometimes on Saturday mornings. And he would also take me to movies in the theater. And he took me to a re-release of Wizard of Oz in a theater. We sat really close up. Everything was huge. I was scared to death, and it was great. A couple years later, he took me to 2001: A Space Odyssey in New York City in a huge theater. I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old, and it blew my mind and scared the crap out of me. And that was great, too. And he would take me to all these movies. He would introduce me to movies that he had seen when he was growing up, that he had loved, and he just shared all of this with me. One of the problems I'm having picking a movie that he loved is because I've already picked them. All the movies that I love, he loved too. And this went on through my adult life, and we would talk about movies and talk about new stuff that came out, up until, you know, he developed Alzheimer's, and his brain started to go, and that was the most tragic thing because he had left. And I couldn't talk about this stuff with him anymore. However, there was one movie that he would see on TV during his sickness that he responded to. I don't know why, I don't know how, but he did, and he would quote this movie. He would talk about it. He would mention it occasionally, and it was Castaway with Tom Hanks. I don't know why. I don't know what it was that connected to him in his declined state, but he responded to it. Maybe it was Tom Hanks's performance, his energy, the volleyball. I don't know, but it was fascinating, and he really loved it. Every time it was on, he would stop and watch it. And so I'm just thinking that this was a little bit of some kind of energy that spoke to him still, even when his faculties were leaving, and when he was mostly gone personality-wise, but it was still a little glimmer of him. So, I have to say that, as odd as it sounds, that I gotta say that, because that was sort of like the last connection that he had to this, the world of movies, and it still lived while he was mostly gone. So I'm going to say Castaway with Tom Hanks.
I got a gift for you.
Oh, my.
My granddaddy used it on the Southern Pacific.
I'm always going to keep this on Memphis time.
Merry Christmas.
I love you.
I love you, too.
I'll be right back.
Hey, is all this turbulence from Santa and those 8 tiny reindeer? Better buckle up, Chuck. It's gonna get bumpy.
Hello? Anybody?
I never should have gotten on that plane.
They think that I am right here. 100 miles squared. That's a search area of 500,000 square miles. That's twice the size of Texas.
From the Academy Award-winning director of Forrest Gump.
We live and we die by time, don't we?
Tom Hanks.
You'll never match. Any chance, will you?
At the edge of the world.
I have made fire!
The end of a man's journey will become the beginning of his life.
I would rather take my chance out there in the ocean than to stay here and die.
You were lost for 4 years. We had a funeral, coffin.
What was in it?
For Tuesday.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder if also the whole idea of sort of being stranded alone and not having anyone to communicate with.
That certainly could have something to do with it. The feeling of being disconnected. Because I knew he was still in there. Mostly. I don't know. It's one of those big mysteries that I hope I never really know the answer to.
Sure.
If you know what I mean. But
yeah.
But
it's fascinating.
It's a great choice, obviously, a meaningful choice. Yeah. And I think that's a very fine choice.
What were you saying, Ashley?
Obviously.
I was just going to say, it's also, Tom Hanks in that movie is the whole point of the volleyball of Wilson is he is desperately trying to connect and to hold on to something. And Walter Parks told me a story about the testing process for that film. Mm-hmm. They did some reshoots on the end. When they initially tested it, it didn't do very well. But after they added, his speech, which I cannot recite right now, but it was basically about how he was not alone when he was on the island.
Right.
Once they added that, like the testing went like just through the stratosphere. It didn't change anything else. It was that. Yeah. That admission of, when I was alone on that island, my memory of love was the thing that kept me going.
Right.
That memory of having connected, and I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. And again, while this was sort of his last expression of that kind of enjoyment. I'm so glad that he had time to see me working in the industry, and knowing that I was, carrying that on in some form. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so grateful that his love of movies sort of, influenced me so much that I went out and wanted to do it. So, yeah, that's Tuesday for me.
It's a great pick for obvious reasons. So, Ashley, that brings us to Wednesday, and your dad's pick for Wednesday. And I will see if the apple falls far from the tree, won't we?
You know what?
Cloak and dagger it is.
Exactly. The apple apparently fell like several yards away.
Couple bushels over.
Couple bushels over. We joked when we were planning this or talking about this when we were recording the Mother's Day episode that we're gonna do Father's Day week, or as we would like to call it, World War II week. Again, well, guess what? If it were up to my dad, it would be World War II week again on the 4:30 movie.
Yeah.
I've thought a lot. He sent me a couple of his picks. One of which actually is fairly recent and not World War II. But I am going to select something that I know we've talked about before on this show, because I think it's meaningful that it was the first thing that was on his list. And I think it also speaks to something else that I know about him. I'll preface this by saying, again, as I mentioned earlier, my dad took me to a lot of movies. We watched a lot of movies together, on Sundays, and on the weekends. And, that was largely how we experienced Bond together. And, I have these great fond memories of all of that. But that man loved movies about racing. And he loved movies about World War II. And the movie that he has picked, that I said, again, I know that we've talked about before here, is 1970s Patton.
Yep.
With George C. Scott and the inimitable Carl Malden.
That was another one of my dad's picks, by the way.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. Men, all this stuff you've heard about America not wanting to fight, wanting to stay out of the war, is a lot of horse dung. Americans traditionally love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle. When you were kids, you all admired the champion marble shooter, the fastest runner, big league ball players, the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war. Because the very thought of losing is hateful to Americans.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. See? No, look, Patton is a great film, man. There's no question about it. He is and it's a great film because he is a larger-than-life, tremendous character, and the portrayal by George C. Scott has both like this weight to it, but also this feral quality.
It's mythic.
It is totally mythic. Yeah. And I asked my dad to give me some words on what it was he liked about the movie. And mainly, he told me what he liked about General Patton. So here's my dad's text. Patton was a super great general who refused to put up with political bullshit. The GIs loved him because they knew he cared about them. He related to them. He did his job and didn't kiss ass. There's my dad. Okay. That's the words from the man himself.
That's awesome.
Something that I was kind of thinking about in the context of all of this is what we bring to the movies that we watch, right? I was thinking about this as we were talking about your dad and Castaway, Darren. And, my dad was, he was in the Army, Army officer, retired in 1981. But, one of my strongest memories, and I talked about this a little bit, I think, on our second, War Week. I think it was, what were we watching? All of a sudden, I'm blanking. It doesn't matter. Uncommon Valor. Thank you. We were watching Uncommon Valor. Yeah. And my dad, for the first time, opened up to me about some of his experiences in Vietnam. About being at this post that was just a couple miles off the border with North Vietnam, and taking off, getting out of there just a couple of weeks before Tet. He told me about and the fact that it didn't go well at that little operating base. He told me about being a survivor assistance officer. Which, if you don't know what that means, his job when he came back was to go to families and tell them, "We're sorry, right. Your son is dead. We're sorry, your son is missing in action. We're sorry, your son is a prisoner of war." And when he would talk about that, it was, look, we're dads, right? We try not to show any emotion to our children other than being amusing and accessible and all that other stuff. We're doing dad things, right? And that was the first time that I really remember him getting choked up about that. So, when he tells me that Patton is his favorite movie and that's his pick for Wednesday, he comes by that honestly, and I take him seriously in that. And again, it is difficult to argue with it as a pick, even on its face.
Right. No, it's a good one, and people usually have to stop me from starting in with the whole opening speech because it's so freaking great. And yeah, it's just I'm not going to do it. I was thinking of doing it. I'm not going to do it.
Come on.
Come on, you want to.
Come on, you magnificent bastard. Come on.
I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. That's all I'm going to do. That's plenty. There's plenty for anyone.
Perfect.
So
if
great.
only I had my American flag background.
That movie it's you mentioned mythic as a great descriptor for it, and it's a film that takes you on such an incredible journey with this character through his sort of rise and fall from grace, and then return to victory, and it's a real epic saga. I just love it.
I should have kissed the son of a bitch.
Well, aside from just being a huge fan of that movie, and of course Franklin Schaffner, because it was his movie after Planet of the Apes, but also it gave Francis Coppola the clout where he, Paramount hired him for The Godfather. So we owe that movie so much because of course he won the Oscar for his rewrite of Patton.
Right.
And
of course, he was hired for it first, but he was able to wield the clout of having it turned from a contemporary film to a period film. He was able to get his entire cast because of his Oscar.
Of his success with Patton. And it gave him so much leverage that he wouldn't have had. They always talk, and Evans, Robert Evans and Coppola, talk about, it was Coppola who made Authentic, because before then, you'd have Kirk Douglas playing, the organization, the syndicate. There was no authentic mafia stories, and you had Coppola, who now had the clout to do it and to cast Al Pacino, and to cast James Caan.
I was just listening to Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, and they were saying that it was winding up to be Ernest Borgnine and Ryan O'Neal. In the film.
Yeah.
And it would have been shit.
There are no worthwhile movies before the year 2000.
That's
so
correct.
I don't know what
That's
we're even
correct. We
talking
shouldn't
about
even talk about them.
These pieces of Yeah, well, wow, that's another great choice. I mean, Patty beat Patton. You don't.
You don't. Nobody beats Patton. That's the point. He reads your book and then he beats you. In fact, he read all of your books, Mark.
Right.
Well, I'm glad Rommel read all my books. Patton read all of Rommel. You know, it's like
an oral history of World War II.
I read your book, Altman, you magnificent bastard. I'd love that as a blurb on my next book. That would be great. Yeah, says George S. Patton.
You inglorious Trexpert.
That's hysterical. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I guess that brings us to Thursday. And obviously Steve threw a little what do they say?
Monkey wrench into the works.
Little wrench into the monkey wrench. Monkey wrench. That's for sure.
Wrench into the monkey.
Because Magnificent Seven was the definitive, like, every time it was on. But that said, there's so many other choices. Thankfully, I thought about originally. The last movie that I ever saw with my dad in the theater was L.A. Confidential. But I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go with that. We both love it, but we both loved it. But I did. There are movies that are more meaningful. And my father was a really interesting guy. And, it's funny because we got along really well, but we didn't have a lot in common in terms of our interests because he was a big sports guy and I had no interest in sports. And, he was president of the Little League. And, I have such respect for him because I remember very vividly there was a guy who came from the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. This African-American player. And a lot of the people in the Little League were like, they had a problem. Right? I mean, this isn't the South. This is Brooklyn, and it was really horrifying. And my dad, who was president of the Little League, would go and pick him up. He'd drive to the other side of Brooklyn for every practice and every game and pick him up and bring him to the field and bring him home afterwards. And anybody who tried to tell my dad that this kid, Mark Griffin, I think it was, couldn't be in the Little League, he basically tell him to fuck off. And it was great. And I have so much respect for that, for everything my dad did that was not great. And, it's just ultimately, like, to me, that's who I remember my dad being. I mean, it was like, he was a stand-up guy, when it came to things like that. And I think I took away a lot from him. And, we went to the movies. He was a huge James Bond fan, so we'd always watch, the ABC Sunday night movie. And he'd always tell me before I knew the lines by heart, which ones were the good ones and which ones weren't, and let me stay up late to watch them when, because the Bonds would often, go over something like Thunderball would go after 11 o'clock, and be like, okay, you can stay up. It's like, you haven't seen it. You got to see the end of those. It's like, that's good. So, I was thinking, what's it going to be? And obviously, it's funny when Steve said Magnificent Seven, I said, I should go with John Sturges' The Great Escape. But I've gone with The Great Escape before. And as much as I love it, and there's a new Criterion Great Escape, which I highly recommend. I have a feeling I'm getting it for Father's Day. It's I know I asked for it. So I'm thinking that, I could go with The Great Escape because that's such a great companion piece to Magnificent Seven. To me, a lot of same cast, and it's just such a great movie. But I'm not going to go with that. It kind of comes down to two movies for me, and I'll tell you what they are. The first is The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman, a great con movie, and of course Robert Shaw.
Absolutely.
Everything about the movie. Won the Oscar for Best Picture back in, I think, 74, 73, 74.
Early.
And, very iconic score by Marvin Hamlish, the famous, The Entertainer. I was, huge. Before Star Wars and before Jaws, that was like the soundtrack album that everyone had.
Wasn't it written by David S. Ward?
It was written by David Ward, who later went on and did Major League.
Yeah. And I worked with him on Down Periscope.
Oh, that's so funny. It's such a great script.
How the mighty.
Yeah. The dialogue in that movie is so good.
Yeah.
And, it's a movie that's not as well known today, but it's like one of the great pairings. I mean, you see why Redford and Newman. You think and you feel like they did a lot more movies than they did together. And really, you know, there's Butch Cassidy, there's the Sting. I mean, they didn't do a ton of movies,
right?
And yet, you know, they're as iconic as any of the great, you know, Bogart and
but
Bacall.
It's definitely an insurgence of the new Hollywood actors on an old Hollywood movie.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
It's sort of a bridge,
and it's so smart and twisty, and you know, it's beautifully shot. You know, set in 1936 during the Depression. You know, about these two grifters looking for the big con, and yet they're so sympathetic, even though they're con men, because of course Robert Shaw is so much more loathsome,
right?
Because Redford inadvertently hits a numbers payoff at the beginning and pulls a con on the wrong guy, and it has sort of lethal repercussions for him and his friend. But it's just a delightful movie. So I was thinking about that, but then I suddenly realized after Steve said Magnificent Seven, I figured, okay, I should go with a Western. And it came to me like almost as though my dad was sending me a message. Silverado.
Oh, that's interesting.
We went to see Silverado. I remember at the Kingsway, and you know, up until then, I think we'd pretty much watched a lot of Westerns on TV, but we'd never seen a Western together because they really were few and far between. We might have seen like Pale Rider, which we both were like, man, this is a crappy remake of Shane. We both, you know, but man, when we saw Silverado, we were just giddy. I mean, I remember when John Cleese says, "My jurisdiction ends here," you know, and for all its flaws, you know, and especially now Brian Dennehy passed away recently. He's so good as the villain in that. And, you know, it's a shame because there's all this stuff with Jeff Goldblum and Linda Hunt was cut, you know, because the studio Columbia didn't have the faith in that movie, and they really cut Kasdan. But even what's left is so great. And, you know, of course, the famous story is that Lawrence Kasdan met Kevin Costner on The Big Chill. He cut him out of the Big Chill because he was the kid who committed suicide. All you see is cufflinks now. And he says, but I'm going to write something for you.
You're wearing my hat. What else you got that's mine?
Now, I don't want to kill you, and you don't want to be dead. You can't be that good.
Let's get out!
What's all this, then?
This is a crazy town, Emmett. I think we ought to just get out of here.
No, this is your horse.
Can't you see this horse loves me? Making a big mistake.
That's what I told him.
If I brought a pretty lady like that into a place like this, I'd stay close. I think you got a point, Emmett. Maybe I better stay here with her.
And we're going to give you a fair trial, followed by a first-class hanging.
I had enough of what ain't right.
Some people think they can push you around, but it's only true if you let it be.
I don't want you to get hurt.
You want one of these? This ought to do.
Let's get out!
Hanging around with you is no picnic.
Come on!
And of course,
And
he
he
wrote
sure
this role that made him a star. I mean, he's so good in Silverado. Just fun and full of life and lovable and just great. And Danny Glover's great in it, and Kevin Kline is wonderful. And I have such fond memories. I remember, you know, most movies I can tell you where I saw it. I mean, I remember seeing it at the Kingsway movie theater in Brooklyn, New York, with my dad, and we both just loved it. We just had so much fun. I mean, I do remember. It's so funny. I remember saying, "Yeah, the town looks a little cheap." It's like he said, you know, they didn't build enough of the town, but you know, it's like he said, back in the day they have all these great Western sets. And it's like, that's true. Said, I don't know about, but we just loved it, and so you know, my pick for this will be, and I thought about Slapshot because again, my dad was the kind of guy who would be reading the sports section while he had the hockey game on the radio and the basketball game on the TV, and all at the same time. And it used to drive me freaking crazy. I'm like, how do you even pay attention all at the same? But he somehow was like able to process it all. And I don't get it. But the fact that he and my brother were such huge sports fans, turned me off to sports for life. But it's why I always say, I know a lot about sports. I just don't like sports, except for rollerball. And
only the first one,
you're
right?
a conscientious objector.
Exactly right. But I like sports movies. We talked about during the sports movie week.
Yeah.
Here's my question, and this is actually a little off topic. Then I go to Silverado, but okay, if only movies after 2000 are valid, right? What about movies that were made before 2000 but take place after 2000? Right? That's really going to bake your noodle. But as far as Silverado goes, I wholly endorse that selection. I love that movie. I think it, as you said, it sort of came out the same year as Pale Rider, and I agree, although I would argue that Pale Rider is really more of a crappy remake of High Plains Drifter, which is kind of, what if David Lynch made a spaghetti western, which is a hell of a thing to kind of think about, and I'd kind of like to see. But yeah, it's everybody like in that movie is just so charismatic. It's having so much fun. It is the spiritual successor, I think, to Redford and Newman, palling around and with as Butch and Sundance. It's very postmodern in that way.
It's a postmodern, but it isn't cutting down the tropes.
Right.
It's honoring them, and
That's
it's
right.
showcasing them.
It's
and it deals
enjoying
with racism with Danny Glover's character, which you hadn't really seen in the Western before, because the Westerns, for as much as we love them, in retrospect, obviously stuff like The Searchers is incredibly racist and things like that.
Yeah.
But this is the first one where it really sort of deals with being an African American on the frontier and everything, and it's such a really terrific movie, and of course, the prerequisite for any great Western is a great score, and Bruce Broughton's score for Silverado is amazing. It's just a great score, like Elmer Bernstein's Magnificent Seven. Like a lot of the great Westerns that have these, the Morricone spaghetti Westerns. There's so many. Before Star Wars, before the space operas, there were the horse operas, and the horse operas all had these great scores, and then later the space operas had these great scores.
Right.
So,
it's a tall order to make one that is that rich and that that great, that's perfect for a movie like that. And Silverado's theme is just terrific.
It's so funny. Had you not picked Magnificent Seven, I would have gone with Magnificent Seven. That would have been it. So I love that you picked Magnificent Seven, and then all of a sudden I had this epiphany because it wasn't even in my notes, to do Silverado, and I'm just like, oh, Silverado, that's a no-brainer. And and it's funny because the story I was telling you about the Little League with Mark Griffin, my dad sort of, looking out for this guy is kind of similar to the way Kevin Kline is looking out for Danny Glover in Silverado. So maybe somehow that resonates. I don't know, but a great movie, fun movie, and that would be my.
And let's not forget Scott Glenn in an amazing performance as sort of the Gary Cooper of the whole thing. He's very quiet, very soft spoken, but he gets the job done, and he's the engine that moves this along.
See, to me, that's another 4:30 movie topic. Movies you don't know Scott Glenn is in, but he's freaking awesome anyway.
The Keep.
That guy is The Keep, exactly. He's always great. He's great in The Hunt for Red October. It's like you don't think about these things, but that guy is so good. He's got so much personality and charisma. Totally.
I'll tell you, I don't care about the Snyder cut of Justice League. I could care less. But I would like to see the Kasdan cut of Silverado.
Hell yeah.
I mean, I don't think it exists, but there was so much footage cut from that movie because there were huge, B stories with, like I said, with Linda Hunt and Jeff Goldblum.
And Danny Glover's sister and
And I would just I wish that existed because boy, I would sure love to see an extended version of Silverado because I feel like there's a better movie in there. But you remember, it just hadn't been a really good, fun Western in theaters for years. I mean, the Western was already on the way out.
It was out. It was already out.
It was out, yeah.
And unfortunately, the response to Silverado, buried it even more. So
it did not do well.
It
did not do well. Yeah,
but I would swear, wasn't it within a week of Pale Rider?
I think it was. I think that was the same year.
85. I believe.
And Pale Rider is not a good movie.
No, it's not.
I mean, until Unforgiven, most of the Eastwood directed Westerns were just sort of pale imitations of the Leone stuff.
Right.
I mean, Don Siegel did a great movie with him, but like the stuff, once he started directing, it's the same thing with the Dirty Harry movies. The Don Siegel's Dirty Harry is great, but by the time you get to Sudden Impact and certainly the Deadpool, those movies are terrible.
Except, hold on, please. The High Plains Drifter again is awesome.
High Plains Drifter is really good.
And is Outlaw Josie Wales was also him, wasn't it? Or am I misremembering who directed that?
No, I think somebody else directed. I don't think that was Eastwood, but I could be. Okay. I don't think he directed it. I could be wrong. I'll tell you what is awful. I had never seen it, and I watched it recently. The Gauntlet. Oh my God! Yeah. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
I watched it a couple of weeks ago. It's really bad.
Yeah, it's not. There's like basically the one cool moment where he's outside like the roadhouse with the bikers, and he's like, "That was my bike, Jack. This is my gun, Clyde." But other than that,
yeah. It's
and who can forget Every Which Way But Loose?
Dude, come on. I mean, you know what? I mean, if there is one genre of movie that I want to bring back in Hollywood, I am talking to you. I feel like I now have the career class. I want to do monkey movies.
The ape sidekick movie.
That's right, the ape sidekick movie. If I can use whatever clout I have in Hollywood to bring back one genre, that's the genre.
Okay.
Man, friend with monkey. I guess that's a Planet of the Apes film too. Is it man not friend with monkey? I don't know.
You should pitch the Sheriff Lobo Chronicles. So now this brings us to Friday. A lot of potential contenders. Why don't we see what we can throw into the mix, Steve?
Some of my other dad picks were. This is a great movie too, The Long Riders, which is a great Western about the James Younger gang that starred all these movie star siblings playing characters that were, historical figures that were siblings. So you had the Keach brothers and the Carradine brothers and the Quaid brothers all playing brothers in the film. And I remember it being a really entertaining, and the Guest brothers too, I think. So there's like all these brothers.
There's no Young Guns too.
But I remember it being a really entertaining movie. And my dad was also a fan of war movies, although the movies that he sent me were not World War II movies, which surprised me. He had a couple of Korean War movies, The Hunters, that starred Robert Mitchum and Robert Wagner, directed by Dick Powell again. Dick Powell raises his head again. And The Bridges at Toko-Ri with William Holden, Grace Kelly. He loves those movies because he loves air combat, jet combat, and he really appreciated the lengths they went to not use stock footage, but get real jets up and shoot really convincing air combat.
Does he like Firefox?
Dude.
Despite the presence of Clint Eastwood, probably not.
You know what, though? The last 30 minutes of Firefox, if that whole movie had been that, I'm in.
Oh, no. I used to rent that from the video store just to watch the last 20 minutes because it was like watching Star Wars. The rest of the movie's unwatchable. Yeah. The last 20 minutes are John Dykstra doing the Death Star Trench and wherever it was in Russia.
Yes.
Think Russian.
The rest is nonsense, but all the stuff with the plane,
that was a cool design. I love that plane. He also listed Last of the Mohicans, the Michael Mann, Daniel Day-Lewis film. It's terrific.
Great film.
He listed Gettysburg, the Jeff Daniels, Tom Berenger, Sam Elliott, Martin Sheen epic, Civil War epic. And here's one. He didn't even know who our benefactor is, but he loves The Patriot.
Oh, nice.
The Dean Devlin movies with Mel
That's great.
Heath Ledger. He listed A Ride with the Devil, the Ong Lee film that I think Mark and I saw in Telluride. I remember we met Skeet Ulrich's dad in a restaurant for lunch. Remember that?
That's right.
He's like, my son's in one of these movies. Oh, yeah? Who's that? Skeet. Skeet.
Are you going to Telluride? Is Telluride still on this Labor Day weekend, Steve Melching?
Got an email a week or two ago saying it is on, and they added a day. It's going to start on Thursday instead of Friday, and they're just going to space out the screenings more and lower capacity. But, given the curve, we haven't flattened the curve, and the curve seems to be going back up again. So
Yeah.
I'm skeptical that it's actually going to happen this year. But
Right. Yeah.
we may go. And then my dad also mentioned Geronimo, and then a bunch of musicals. He loves musicals. He listed Paint Your Wagon, being a Clint Eastwood.
And Lee Marvin.
Yeah.
And then, he loves Phantom of the Opera, that cheesy, adaptation of the Andrew Lloyd Webber Phantom of the Opera.
You had me until Phantom of the Opera,
Right.
Steve.
And My Fair
nobody's
Lady,
perfect.
Sound of Music. That's surprising, Sound of Music. But my dad has a soft spot for musicals. So anyway.
Your dad and my mom would get along famously.
My dad did too. He loved all of the Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers
I remember
musicals.
mentioning Seven Brides for Seven Brothers was a favorite of his growing up.
See, my dad's idea of fighting Nazis was The Dirty Dozen, not Sound of Music, but that was just
But
him.
you want to see that mashup?
Well,
right? The Dirty Dozen has to get like that family, out of.
Let's talk about who was more successful fighting the Nazis: the Dirty Dozen or the Von Trapp family singers, who escaped pretty much all intact.
True, very true.
Oh my God!
But I'm going to throw in like Carousel and
Logan's Run.
No. The Rodgers and Hammerstein Carousel, and of course Oklahoma, and all of those, the King and I, all of those sort of 50s and 60s musicals. But of course, he also introduced me to my favorite film, Adventures of Robin Hood, but also Captain Blood and The Seahawk and all those wonderful late 30s swashbucklers with Errol Flynn. And basically every movie that I love, it was because my dad loved it first. He went and saw Superman first before me, but you know who he went with? He went with his friend who he had known since he was 8 years old in that one town, and he went with his friend to go see Superman because they would read the comics together. And so that was a great thing. That
man was Clark Kent.
Yeah, unfortunately it wasn't, but
Superman.
It was really good, and he came back and he said, "I think you'll like it very much." And sure enough, I did.
Yeah, that's great.
So I would add a movie that Mark, you almost listed. Almost. The Great Escape.
Yeah.
With Steve McQueen. My father once again weighs in, and he brings up a point about that movie that in all the conversations we've had about it here, I've never really thought about, that I think is really interesting. I don't know why this detail jumps out at my dad. So he says, The Great Escape is a movie about never giving up. Steve McQueen, in a German prison camp for American officers during World War II, has his baseball and baseball glove with him, a coping mechanism. He broke out of prison and actually stole a motorcycle and was captured and sent back to prison more than once. The cool thing is that you always see him with his security blanket, the ball, and his glove. Never thought about that. It's interesting that that's the thing that jumps out.
It passes the channel surfing test,
Yeah.
which means if you're changing channels, and The Great Escape is on, you watch it till the end. It's one of those movies, and that's a long movie. But man, it's so good. Again, Elmer Bernstein score, amazing cast. We talked about this before.
It's great.
Richard Attenborough.
It's great watching.
The old man.
It's great watching James Garner seduce the German guard, basically as he would with a woman. Give him chocolate, and it's very funny and very. It's very James Garner, very cool.
Oh, it's so funny, too, because I saw something recently on social media where some schmuck was observing that this is not a good movie and it's not realistic because the Germans would never allow anything like this. It's based on a real story.
Yeah.
You idiot.
Yeah. People are stupid. People are stupid, and we shouldn't listen
sadly,
to them.
We give them a platform to be dumb and reward them for it.
I've done a fair amount of research on POW camps in World War II, and the crazy shit that they got away with in those camps really does defy belief. Yeah. But the reality is even crazier than what we've seen in these movies.
Well, so really, Hogan's Heroes is kind of a gritty documentary.
Well, basically, what's missing from this equation that this doofus didn't realize is that basically the POW camps were run by people that the main military leaders didn't want in the action. They wanted to push them off, and so the people running the camps didn't want to be there any more than the prisoners did.
Like Sergeant Schultz, he totally did not want to be there.
Yes, like Sergeant Schultz. But
I know nothing.
I see nothing.
A lot of those commandants were, World War I veterans.
Yeah.
They were older, and they were from a different era of, soldier.
Well, the gentleman warrior, as opposed to
the Luftwaffe, who didn't really go along with most of the tenets of the Nazi regime, were put in charge of the prison camps,
the air camps.
The air camps, yeah,
very different. Yeah, the Luftwaffe camps.
Yeah, so
treated the flyers very different. Like, you didn't, if you're a flyer, if you're a bomber pilot, and you got captured by the Wehrmacht, you did not want to get captured by the Army. You wanted to get captured by the Air Force.
Correct.
I mean, and Donald Pleasance is the antithesis of Blofeld in this movie. It's a guy who's going forger, who's going blind, and so many great performances. Richard Attenborough, the kindly old man of Jurassic Park, is Agent Triple X. The most formidable and deadly British, undercover operative, and just so many great people. You talked about James Garner and James Coburn and Charles Bronson again, and as the tunnel king.
And Stan.
Stan is in there as well.
Still,
that's right.
we have Stan.
And then we have Stan.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and I'll give you a few other picks. I mentioned The Sting. Also, another war movie with James Garner, The Americanization of Emily, with James Garner and Julia Andrews, which is more, and James Coburn, Familiar Faces, which is another comedy. Any Bond movie for sure. I mentioned Slapshot, LA Confidential. The African Queen is a movie he absolutely loved, with Kate Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart in a very un-Bogart-like performance.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The movie people don't talk about as much now because, technically it doesn't hold up, but Walter Houston, it's just fantastic.
John
Houston.
Oh,
I say Walter Houston. I meant John Houston. Sorry. And then for more obscure, there are a couple of war movies that I don't think I've ever mentioned on the show before. The Man Who Never Was, which was about the plan to basically fool the Nazis into not realizing that the Allied invasions would be at Normandy. Right. So they faked this guy and put papers on him, and have the Germans discover his body.
A dead body wash up with a briefcase with fake hands.
So it's like Weekend at Bernie's, but
it kind of is. It's like Weekend in Alsace-Lorraine or something. But it's really a terrific movie. And then a very hard-hitting drama, also World War II, is The Counterfeit Traitor. I don't know how many of you know the George Seaton movie, Counterfeit Traitor. This is William Holden, who plays this sort of American bon vivant who's like a war profiteer. And the British and the Americans sort of catch him and force him, because he's like really friendly with the Nazis, and sort of force him to like work for them undercover. And because he's befriended all these Nazis, he's sort of like the anti-Schindler. And over the course of this, he sort of and dealing with this resistance leader, Lily Palmer, played by Lily Palmer, he sort of has a change of heart and sort of realizes, hey, the Nazis are bad, and and he sort of realizes like, hey, finds himself more and more involved in the fight against Nazism. And it's a really great drama with a great cast, and William Holden plays a very unlikable character, but as always, he's fantastic. And it has a really tragic, sad ending. I mean, this is another movie I used to watch, I think on Channel 5 or Channel 9 in New York, and I remember when the ending was coming, I always used to get uncomfortable, because I knew how to end it. So, when you're watching a movie you love and you always think, oh, maybe this time it'll end different, and they never do, unless it's Clue. And it's just a really powerful movie, and I think it's on Amazon Prime now. So if you don't have I don't think Paramount ever put it out on Blu-ray. I think it's just on DVD, but you can watch it on Amazon Prime. It's really good. I highly recommend it. The Counterfeit Traitor.
I don't think we're going to come up with a consensus on Friday.
I really don't.
I think this is one.
I think this is one for the audience to decide for themselves and think about, their fathers and what their family bring together movie would be. So.
Absolutely, and I think and let us know on social media, because you guys are educated. I actually care what you have to say. So go on Twitter at 430 Movie Pod and let us know what you or your dad had to say and what movies you're watching Friday on the 430 Movie, because we actually do want to know what you have to say. Because if you're wise enough to be listening to this podcast, clearly your opinion matters. Unlike that idiot who said that movies before the year 2000 don't matter.
Just make sure your selections are before the year 2000.
And I want to remind you that
did pick one that was after 2000, which was Casino Royale.
What was that?
Casino Royale.
Oh, excellent
So
choice.
Yeah.
Excellent choice. And, I think my dad might have picked Free Enterprise, except he was always mad at me till the day he died that we cut out a scene. My dad was originally supposed to have a big scene. This is my first movie. And playing basketball where the guys were awful basketball players. And he was going to come after watching them in astonishment at how bad they were, and then just pick up the ball and casually sink this, foul shot from center court and make them all look like idiots. But it rained, so we weren't able to shoot it. So he ended up becoming a waiter instead at the club. Yeah. And on the day, we threw him a line just because, he'd come all the way from New York and he was sick and, wanted to give him a line. And it just, for whatever reason, it didn't cut together and we didn't include it in the movie. And I never forget, ever since that premiere, he never let me forget that I cut his line out of the movie. So that was a mistake.
That's what you get.
That's what you get. I'm merciless, even with my own dad, when it comes to the cutting room floor. But anyway, this was great. I'm so glad we did this, and it's all because of Darren's mother, ironically, that we did this Father's Day episode. It was her suggestion to do Mother's Day last month, and how could we not do Father's Day this month? And we're also our dads for inspiring us and showing us these movies. For those of us dads now, I can certainly attest to the fact that it's a wonderful thing to be able to share so many of these movies with our kids. Yeah. And expose them to these wonderful, wonderful films. Many of them made before the year 2000. In fact, I'm very glad my daughter loves black and white movies.
That's
loves
good.
them.
I'm fascinated to see, 430 movie, The Next Generation, what your kids choose as your movies for Father's Day.
Well, I know they will be horrified when some critic gets online and says that movies that were made before 2020 just don't count.
Huh. We were talking about doing the 330 movie with my kids and Caden, Ashley's son, and just putting together a little thing and doing a kids spinoff of 430 movie. So maybe one day. But anyway, it's so good to get together with everybody. It's been a while. It's been a whole month since we did this. And we'll be on hiatus through the fall, but then we'll return with season 3 of the 430 movie, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Unless we do a special edition, maybe we do summer movies, a summer movie about summer school, summer break.
Yeah. Bingo week.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that we will continue to return with these special episodes, but we won't be back on a regular weekly basis probably till the fall. Right. Well, hopefully we can be back in the studio then, because as much as it's nice to see everybody through Zoom, I miss the Shake Shack and I miss your smiling faces.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to be back in the studio, and hopefully that day will come
someday.
So, yeah. Someday. But for now, on Monday, Steve Melching, it's
dun 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 dun, the Magnificent Seven.
Dun, dun, dun. The Magnificent Seven. On Tuesday, Darren Doctorman, it's
I've made fire. I'm a castaway.
It's Castaway on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Ashley Miller,
Patton.
It's Patton.
Patton.
And on
It's
Thursday,
Patton.
it's Silverado. And Friday, it's your
up
dad's
to
pick.
you.
It's up to you. So we want to hear what your dad has to say, or if you're a dad, what your pick is. And you can do that on 430 Movie Pod, or visit us at Electric Surge on Facebook, Electric Surge, or 430 Movie on Facebook. And meanwhile, if you're curious to watch video podcasts of the show, or one of our other great 430 Movie podcasts like Inglorious Trexperts or The Best Movies Never Made, you can download the free Electric Now app available at your favorite app store. That means You download the app and you can play episodes, video episodes of 430 Movie and Glorious Trexperts, other podcasts, as well as episodes of Leverage, Librarians, and many other fine movies and TV shows, all for free on your phone, on your TV, on your iPad, on your Roku, whatever. So we encourage you to download the Electric Now app, which is now available in your favorite app store, and keep an eye on your podcast feed, because the 430 Movie will return with special episodes until we return from hiatus this fall. But until then, Eyewitness News starts now.
This week's episode is brought to you by Off-World Colonies, a golden land of opportunity and adventure, and by the Tyrell Corporation, more human than human.
This show is produced by Dean Devlin and Mark A. Altman and is an Electric Surge Network production.